Have you ever wondered why some parents feel regret after raising their children with unwavering love? This thought-provoking question delves into the complex emotions surrounding parenthood and aging, inviting you to reflect on your own experiences and expectations. In this video, we'll explore the poignant story of Mr. Tanaka, an elderly man who grapples with his past choices and the consequences of devoting himself entirely to his son. As we journey through Mr. Tanaka's narrative, you'll uncover valuable insights into the dynamics of family relationships, the importance of preparing for your future, and the emotional toll of unconditional love. We'll discuss the common pitfalls that many parents encounter, how these can impact their well-being in old age, and what practical steps you can take to avoid these regrets. By watching until the end, you'll gain a deeper understanding of how to foster healthier relationships with your children, the essential preparations for your later years, and ways to ensure your emotional needs are met. Don't miss this opportunity to reflect on your own life and learn how to build a more fulfilling future. Join us as we navigate the intricate balance between love, sacrifice, and self-care in the journey of life. If you are not subscribed, I recommend subscribing and activating the notification bell so you don't miss any videos. Your support means a lot to me, and if you enjoyed this video, you can help me continue spreading the valuable lessons by liking and sharing it. If you like the topic of this video, please comment 1. If you don't, please comment 0 to let me know how I can improve and make better videos for you. Now, let's begin. After hanging up the phone, I felt an overwhelming sense of helplessness, as if the ground had shifted beneath me. The task before me seemed deceptively simple: to buy a high-speed train ticket for Mr. Tanaka, whose health was declining by the day. Yet, my mind was spinning, clouded with worry and uncertainty, and I realized with a sinking heart that I didn't even know how to buy a train ticket for an elderly person. I tried calling the ticket office again, desperately hoping for guidance, but no one answered. My pulse quickened as the unanswered rings seemed to echo my growing sense of urgency about Mr. Tanaka's condition. Panic started to creep in, wrapping itself around my thoughts, and I felt truly lost, realizing that even simple tasks could become mountainous obstacles when weighed down by the worry of a loved one's health. Frustrated and nearly frantic, I reached out to a neighbor, explaining my situation in a rush of words. She could see the worry in my eyes and nodded with understanding, but still, I felt that time was slipping away from me. Not wanting to waste another moment, I hurried over to Oko's house, hoping he might know how to navigate this situation. When he opened the door, I could tell by his face that my disheveled state and the worry etched on my face alarmed him. "What's going on?" he asked gently, his eyes scanning me with genuine concern. I was still catching my breath, my words spilling out between gasps, as I explained the situation and asked if he could help me figure out how to buy a ticket to Tokyo. Oko's response surprised me. Rather than simply helping with the ticket, he offered a level of support that I hadn't anticipated. "Next time, don't worry about running over here," he said softly, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Just call me. I'll get the ticket for you. There's no need for you to go through this alone." His words were a balm to my panicked heart, and I felt a surge of gratitude wash over me. But Oko's concern didn't stop there. As he fiddled with his smartphone, checking ticket availability, he looked at me and asked casually, "By the way, why are you going to Tokyo?" For a moment, I hesitated. I couldn't bring myself to fully disclose the reality of Mr. Tanaka's illness and how his condition seemed to worsen each day. Instead, I chose my words carefully, replying with a vague explanation that we felt it would be best for Mr. Tanaka to see a specialist in Tokyo. Oko's expression changed in an instant, his casual demeanor replaced with urgency. "Please go quickly," he urged, his voice filled with sincere concern. "How are your aunt and uncle holding up?" Without hesitating, he canceled our tickets and insisted he would personally drive us to Tokyo. He explained that he had planned to take a day off anyway and that he wouldn't feel comfortable letting us travel alone under such stressful circumstances. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment 1 below to let me know that you are still here with me. I felt uncomfortable accepting such a generous offer, fearing it was too much to ask of him, but Oko shook his head, unwavering. "Please don't say that. It's far too dangerous for you both to go alone when your uncle's health is at risk," he said firmly, his gaze warm and unrelenting. "If anything were to happen, my mother would scold me for letting you go without help," he added with a gentle smile. His kindness felt overwhelming, almost too much for me to handle, and as he promised to be there when we were ready to leave, I found myself both deeply grateful and incredibly emotional. After he saw us home, I went inside, and with the door closed, the emotions I'd been holding back finally spilled over. I slipped into the bathroom, shutting myself in as I tried to contain the silent tears that streamed down my face. My heart ached, not just with the weight of Mr. Tanaka's fragile health, but with the realization that we were truly alone, dependent on the kindness of friends like Oko for help. I knew I had to be strong for Mr. Tanaka, but in that small, quiet moment, I let myself feel the depth of my worry, my fear, and my exhaustion. When I finally returned to the room, Mr. Tanaka looked at me expectantly, his face etched with concern. "What did Kenichi say?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I relayed our son's words, and Mr. Tanaka sighed deeply, his silence heavy and pained. At that moment, I could see it clearly. The sorrow in his eyes, the regret he tried to hide. He was grieving a distance he hadn't intended to create, a distance that had grown between us and our son, Kenichi. And I, too, felt the same painful ache, the awareness that our choices, made with the best intentions, had somehow led us to this place where we seemed like strangers to our son. Kenichi had always been extraordinary, even as a young boy. From an early age, everyone noticed his uniqueness. Adults in the neighborhood would stop to marvel at him, remarking on his bright mind and his respectful demeanor. Among his peers, he wasn't just a friend. He was a rival, someone to aspire to. Academically gifted, Kenichi soared above expectations, and his grades were consistently the highest in his class. Mr. Tanaka and I, both teachers, took enormous pride in his achievements. We poured everything we had into his education, investing in the best cram schools and special classes, ensuring he never had to lift a finger at home so he could devote all his time to studying. Kenichi did not let us down. He achieved top grades, entered a prestigious university, studied abroad, and secured a high-paying job that made us beam with pride. For years, we felt an indescribable joy, basking in the success of the son we had worked so hard to nurture. In those years, our pride in him was like a glowing flame, and we were endlessly praised. Schools invited us to speak, parents sought our advice on child-rearing, and community leaders called Kenichi a treasure of our community. It was a time when our pride knew no bounds, and our dreams for him seemed to expand with every compliment we received. But as the years passed and conversations in our community shifted from academic achievements to family, marriage, and grandchildren, I began to feel a growing emptiness. Kenichi eventually settled in Germany, and though we missed him deeply, we supported his decision wholeheartedly, even selling our home in the city and moving back to the village to help him buy a house. The villagers often joked, "You'll spend your old age in Germany," and I would laugh, but deep inside, I nurtured the dream that we would one day be close again, reunited as a family. Yet, life had other plans. We encouraged Kenichi to get married, hoping to share in that new chapter of his life. But the reality of our distance hit me like a wave when I learned, through a friend, that Kenichi had married 2 years prior and hadn't even told us. When I found out, I was stunned, my heart breaking in ways I couldn't explain. I felt a mix of anger and sorrow, a bitter ache of feeling excluded from his life. My first instinct was to scold him, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, my heart ached to reach out to his wife, to support her and help them in any way I could. But Kenichi, in his quiet confidence, insisted they were managing on their own, a sentiment that only deepened my sense of helplessness. It felt as if our once close family bond had become a mere thread, fraying with each passing year. Reflecting now, I realize we poured our lives into Kenichi's success, building our entire world around the dream of his future. But perhaps in doing so, we unintentionally prepared him to live far away from us, physically and emotionally. The irony is as painful as it is clear. While we work so hard to give him every advantage, every opportunity, we may have inadvertently created the very distance that now separates us. And as I look at Mr. Tanaka, I know he feels it too. The sorrow of realizing that our greatest pride has come with the heaviest price. As young women often say nowadays, if they're not looked after during pregnancy and after giving birth, they might withhold care when their parents grow old. When I mentioned this to Kenichi, he laughed, dismissing my concerns, saying, "Things aren't like that anymore. If anything needs to be addressed, we'll handle it ourselves." His casual response stung, making me feel out of place in a world that seemed increasingly foreign, even with my son. When our granddaughter was born, both Mr. Tanaka and I made the journey to Germany, eager to be there to support Kenichi and his new family. But Mr. Tanaka, uncomfortable with the unfamiliar environment, returned to Japan in less than 2 weeks. As he left, he confessed that he couldn't quite settle in. Everything was too different, too alien to feel like home. Determined to help, I stayed behind to care for our precious granddaughter, hoping to bring a piece of our traditions and values into their lives. However, it didn't take long to see that while Kenichi's salary was impressive by Japanese standards, it barely covered the basics in Germany. The cost of living was shockingly high, making me realize how different his life had become from the one we had envisioned. Yumi, my daughter-in-law, treated me with kindness, but there was an undeniable sense of distance between us, a wall that I couldn't quite break down, no matter how hard I tried. One day, wanting to help, I went into Kenichi and Yumi's room to tidy up a bit, but Yumi's reaction was sharp and cold. "Please respect our privacy," she said firmly, her tone leaving no room for discussion. It felt as if the air between us grew colder, and I realized then that even my most well-meaning actions could be seen as intrusions into this new world Kenichi had made for himself. The cultural gaps only grew wider. When our granddaughter was just 2 months old, Yumi decided to stop breastfeeding, something that left me genuinely concerned. I gently encouraged her to continue for a little longer, only to be met with a defensive response. "This is my body. I won't let anyone interfere with it," Yumi retorted, clearly upset. Her words left me feeling small, like an outsider who was somehow overstepping her bounds. Even though we were all Japanese, it was as if we spoke different languages. Sometimes, Kenichi and Yumi would converse in English, likely to prevent me from overhearing their conversations. It was disheartening to hear them discuss topics of freedom and individual rights in a way that felt foreign to my own values. I could feel myself drifting further away from them, realizing more and more that I didn't fully belong in their world. Every day was a mixture of quiet anxiety, tiptoeing around, fearing I might inadvertently offend them or seem intrusive. The stress was a constant weight, knowing I was walking on a thin line between showing love and overstepping. When our granddaughter turned 2, Yumi enrolled her in an early education program, a decision that seemed hasty to me. Nonetheless, I respected her choice, though it felt like one more step in the separation from the way I had raised Kenichi. Yumi thanked me politely, expressed her appreciation for my help, and sent me back to Japan. I returned home feeling as though I'd left a part of myself behind, but I also carried with me a hollow sense of acceptance, that we no longer had a true place in our son's life abroad. From that point on, when neighbors would ask us cheerfully if we'd be spending our retirement abroad, Mr. Tanaka and I could only offer vague smiles and careful replies. The reality, unspoken yet clear between us, was that Kenichi and his family had fully adapted to their life in Germany. They had become part of a world where we could not seamlessly fit. Our hopes of being part of our granddaughter's life, of growing closer as a family, quietly dissolved as we came to understand that our presence would only disrupt their well-settled routine. In the past, we would occasionally help Kenichi with our pension, proud to support him from afar. But now, we reserved that money for our own lives, choosing to embrace the freedom that we still had. Twice a year, we'd take trips to explore parts of Japan we'd never visited, enjoying the small pleasures that retirement could offer. We spent our days playing shogi with friends, going fishing, and even trying our hand at dancing. There was an unexpected joy in this freedom, a new chapter we hadn't anticipated. Sometimes, when I would see other elderly friends worn out from taking care of their grandchildren, I couldn't help but feel a quiet satisfaction, watching them look at us with a tinge of envy. For the first time, I felt a freedom from the weight of responsibility, a chance to enjoy our remaining years together. It was bittersweet but also liberating, a mixture of loss and newfound peace as we found joy in simply being able to live for ourselves. Over 10 years slipped by as if in a dream, leaving only fleeting memories in their wake. Kenichi returned to Japan just twice, and even then, his visits were brief, as if he were merely stopping by. Yumi and our granddaughter never came at all. At the time, I told myself it was fine. I convinced myself it was a sign of his success and his independence, and I wanted to respect his freedom to live his own life. I had always believed that part of loving him meant letting him go, even if that meant he was far away. But as the years wore on, a quiet ache grew within me, a hollow longing for the family I hardly recognized anymore. Then, Mr. Tanaka fell ill, and my mind flooded with anxieties I had long ignored. If something were to happen to him, if I were to lose him, what would become of me? The thought of being alone gripped me with a fear I couldn't shake. Oko kindly drove us to Tokyo, and Kenichi arranged everything for us, from hotel reservations to navigating the hospital procedures and even the complicated medication routines. I was deeply grateful for his help. Just the sight of the bustling hospital entrance overwhelmed me, and the thought of managing online reservations and payments on my own felt impossible. Technology had raced so far ahead, leaving me in a world that felt alien and unkind to someone of my age, nearing 70. For all its advancements, I felt abandoned by this fast-moving world, struggling to keep pace. The doctor called us into a quiet room and delivered the news that shattered our lives. Mr. Tanaka had terminal liver cancer. The words hit me like a punch to the chest, and once again, I found myself retreating behind Mr. Tanaka's back, letting my tears flow in silence. My heart ached, not just from the sorrow of his diagnosis, but from the sheer helplessness of watching the man who had been my strength and companion fade away. When my tears finally dried, I picked up the phone and called Kenichi, hoping he might be able to stay for a while. To his credit, he took a day off work and came, his presence offering some comfort, however brief. But after 3 short days, he left again, his face drawn with the same busy, distracted look I had come to recognize all too well. Before leaving, Kenichi reassured me, telling me not to worry about the expenses. He explained that he could cover it all, including any advanced treatments, so we shouldn't let finances hold us back. And although his words were meant to comfort me, they cut deep. I bit my lip, fighting back tears, swallowing the bitterness that lodged in my throat. All he could talk about was money. Didn't he understand? Couldn't he see that no amount of money could buy back his father's life? The frustration and anger I had tried to suppress surged up within me. Kenichi had become so distant, so focused on his career and responsibilities that he seemed to forget the value of simply being there, of spending time with the people who loved him most. Meanwhile, Mr. Tanaka's condition worsened. Radiation and chemotherapy took a brutal toll on his body, leaving him a mere shadow of himself, his frame reduced to bone, his strength ebbing away day by day. The mounting medical bills became an unrelenting reminder of the harsh reality that even advanced treatments couldn't stop the inevitable. One day, the doctor took me aside, his voice gentle but firm, and told me there was no longer any point in continuing such grueling treatments. Focus on what he enjoys now, he advised softly. Let him savor the foods he loves. Let him spend his days in peace. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment below to let me know that you are still here with me. Hearing those words broke something inside me. Here was the man I had shared my life with, and now, in these final moments, I was being told to let go, to focus not on treatments or cures but on simple comforts. It was both a mercy and a heartbreak, a reminder that, in the end, it wasn't the treatments or the money that mattered. It was the time spent together, the love, the memories, and the small moments that would endure long after he was gone. In those moments, I wished Kenichi could see it too, that he would understand how fleeting life is and how irreplaceable each moment with his father truly was. Mr. Tanaka held my hand tightly, his fingers still gripping with the strength of a man who had endured so much, and yet he was barely able to speak. His voice, once strong and full of life, was now just a whisper, each word a struggle. I leaned close, straining to hear the faint, broken syllables as he spoke of his worry for me, his fear about what would happen after he was gone. At that moment, my heart felt as if it were being torn in two, an unbearable ache that only grew as I realized that soon I would be without the person who had walked beside me through so many seasons of life. As I reflected on our years together, I felt a deep pang of regret mixed with sorrow. I had spent so much of my youth pouring every ounce of my energy into raising Kenichi, but it was Mr. Tanaka who had stayed by my side, the one who had shared my burdens, who had seen me through every hardship. Now, just when I needed him most, I was about to lose him. With our son's career taking him to faraway places, Kenichi was no longer the pillar I had once envisioned. When Mr. Tanaka's health worsened, I brought him back to his hometown hospital, clinging to the hope that he would find some comfort in familiar surroundings. I informed Kenichi of his condition, and finally, he rushed over by plane. The moment Mr. Tanaka laid eyes on Kenichi, tears welled up in his cloudy, weakened gaze, and he struggled to speak, his lips pressing together as if trying to hold in a lifetime's worth of words. But Kenichi, it seemed, was always elsewhere in his mind. Just 2 days later, his restlessness grew obvious, as one phone call after another pulled him away from the moment. On the third morning, he approached me with an apology, saying there were troubles at work and that he had to leave. Something inside me snapped. I couldn't hold back the anger that had simmered beneath the surface for so long, and I exploded, scolding him with a bitterness I hadn't known I could feel. "Weren't you hoping your father would pass away while you were here, so you could simply be done with it?" I cried out, my words stinging as they left my mouth. "Is money so important to you that you'd rather chase it than be with your father? Is there truly no place in your life for family anymore?" My voice wavered, but my anger held firm. Kenichi looked at me, taken aback, a glint of confusion in his eyes as he replied quietly, "Mother, I'm struggling too." His words hung in the air, filling me with an even deeper sorrow. I had raised him with the hope that he would succeed and that he would have a life full of accomplishments and independence. But now, standing in front of me was a son so detached from family that he couldn't see how desperately I needed his emotional support. After Kenichi left, an overwhelming fear took hold of me. I stayed at the hospital, unable to bring myself to leave Mr. Tanaka's side, terrified that even a brief absence might mean missing his final moments. Nurses were kind enough to accompany me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that if I looked away even for an instant, Mr. Tanaka would slip away from me forever. My in-laws, despite their own busy lives, came to the hospital, ensuring I didn't fall ill from exhaustion. They took turns staying by Mr. Tanaka's bedside throughout the night, despite needing to keep their shop open during the day to make ends meet. I was overwhelmed by their kindness and their selflessness. When I tried to give them money as a small gesture of thanks, they firmly refused, saying that it was their duty as family. Memories of my own parents' words floated back to me. They had once dismissed my in-laws as useless, but now, in my darkest hours, I wished my son wasn't the one who seemed so distant, so indifferent. In those moments, I longed not only for a companion but for someone who would be there to share these last chapters of life, just as Mr. Tanaka had been with me. Mr. Tanaka passed away a few days later, quietly, in the early hours of the morning. At around 3 a.m., his breathing slowed, and he summoned a final burst of strength, his eyes fixed on the door as if waiting, hoping against hope, that Kenichi might walk through and be with him at the end. But his hope went unfulfilled. The door remained closed, and his son didn't appear. When he took his last breath, I felt a strange, numbing stillness wash over me. I had anticipated this moment, yet I was surprised by the absence of tears. It was as if I had already grieved him in pieces, my heart gradually letting go as I saw him fade day by day. When it came time to arrange the funeral, Kenichi returned to Japan, but Yumi and my granddaughter were nowhere to be seen. Their absence left an icy void in my heart, a reminder of how far they had drifted from us, both in distance and in spirit. After the funeral, I buried Mr. Tanaka's ashes in the cemetery, placing him to rest in the land he had called home. Kenichi expressed gratitude to my sister's family, who had been there for us, tirelessly helping with the care of his parents. He offered them his thanks, his tone polite but distant. Yet not once did he ask about my future, about how I would carry on alone. The silence from him on this matter was deafening, a painful confirmation of the distance that had grown between us, a distance that no amount of words, money, or polite gratitude could bridge. I stood there, feeling both the weight of my solitude and the ache of unspoken words, longing for a connection that felt as if it had disappeared forever. That night, as we gathered around the dinner table, Kenichi finally broke the silence, his face shadowed with a troubled expression. He started to explain, almost hesitantly, how life abroad wasn't as ideal as it appeared. Managing finances, housing, and everything else. It's not easy, he admitted, his words heavy with frustration that seemed out of place. Then, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, he suggested that his younger siblings should handle the responsibility of taking care of us as we age. His words hit me like a physical blow. I was stunned, sitting there in silence, unable to believe the ease with which he dismissed his duty to us. My mind raced, trying to process his shocking suggestion. After all the sacrifices, the endless hours devoted to his education and success, he was now, with a few careless words, placing the responsibility of our well-being onto others. After Kenichi left that night, I felt an unbearable weight pressing on my heart. I wandered to Mr. Tanaka's grave, seeking a sense of solace from his quiet resting place. The grief I had held back for so long came flooding in, and I spoke to him as if he were still beside me. "You're so fortunate," I whispered, my voice catching in my throat. "At least you had someone watching over you until the end." As I sat there, alone under the darkening sky, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of envy that Mr. Tanaka had gone first, sparing himself the silent ache that comes from being left behind. Sometimes, I thought, death itself isn't the true sorrow. It's the pain left for those who must endure life without those they love. After Mr. Tanaka passed, my sister reached out, inviting me to stay with her. We decided to share our days, finding comfort in each other's company. In the rhythm of daily life, we managed well, both of us growing accustomed to a new routine. On weekends, the house would fill with the warmth and laughter of family, as my in-laws would bring their wives and children to visit. The presence of children brought a liveliness that filled the rooms with joy. I cherished these moments, watching the young ones play and laugh, and each time they visited, I gave them small gifts or pocket money. My days were simple. With my pension, social insurance, and critical illness coverage, money had ceased to hold much significance. The truth I came to understand was that, as we age, the greatest fear isn't poverty or sickness, it's loneliness. This life brought me peace for several years until the inevitable came for my sister as well. She fell ill and, despite my care, passed away, leaving me alone once more. Kenichi returned for her funeral, this time with his family of 3, but my granddaughter had grown into a young woman I barely recognized. She stood there, elegant and fashionable, her fluent English mingling awkwardly with the quiet tones of our rural home. I found myself at a loss around her, unable to bridge the gap between us. In the end, all I could manage were polite offerings. Eat this, try that, pointing to the dishes I had prepared in the hope that something would connect us. The meal had been carefully prepared by Yumi, but I had made a special dish of boiled eggs just for Kenichi, a small comfort he had always loved. When my granddaughter reached for one, Yumi's reaction was swift and startling. She slapped the girl's hand sharply and shot a cold glance in my direction. Then, to my utter disbelief, Yumi slapped my hand as well, as if to remind me that I was unwelcome in this new world my son now inhabited. At that moment, my heart shattered, sinking under the weight of a truth I had tried to deny. I realized then that she had harbored resentment toward me all along, perhaps for my traditional ways or a connection she felt separated her from Kenichi. I had hoped for a moment of bonding, a simple meal shared with family, but instead, I felt like an intruder in my own son's life. Later that night, curiosity and a lingering sense of unease urged me to speak with Kenichi. I asked, quietly but firmly, "When your father passed away, neither Yumi nor our granddaughter returned. But they're here now, at your aunt's funeral. Why was that?" He looked away, his voice tinged with discomfort. "There were special circumstances back then," he said, almost in a whisper. "Yumi had just gone through a miscarriage. Traveling was difficult, and we had to make tough decisions." His words surprised me, and a small wave of relief eased some of the heaviness in my chest. As he continued, Kenichi's tone softened, and he said, "Mother, despite everything, Yumi and our daughter are grateful for you. They've always been kind to me." His words stirred a bittersweet comfort in my heart. Perhaps in some way, Kenichi still held on to the bond we once shared, even if it was hidden under the layers of time and distance. It wasn't the reconciliation I'd hoped for, nor the closeness I once believed we would always have, but it reminded me that, even in his complicated way, he still carried his parents with him. And as I lay awake that night, I held on to that sliver of peace, realizing that while time had changed us, the love I held for him remained steadfast, even in the face of all we had lost. If you are still watching this video and find these lessons useful, please comment 3 below to let me know that you are still here with me. This time, Kenichi stayed longer than he had during previous visits. But even though he was nearby, his family was staying at a hotel in the city, making it difficult to see him. It felt strange, a subtle reminder of the growing distance between us, but I brushed it off as I busied myself with preparations following my sister's passing. In the meantime, rumors started to circulate in the village that parts of our community were marked for redevelopment, and that homes, including mine, were potentially eligible for compensation. I hadn't given much thought to the land's value, but the whispers of a significant payout sparked a flicker of hope in me. Curious and cautiously excited, I hurried to the village office to confirm. The village chief greeted me warmly and confirmed with a smile, "It's true. The plans have already been submitted. We're just finalizing the details, so it hasn't been formally announced yet. But rest assured, your area is included." I even mentioned it to Kenichi when he called me a few months ago. His words felt like a hammer blow. So Kenichi had known all along, even before I had heard the rumors. I managed to ask reflexively, and the chief nodded, looking at me with an oblivious smile. On my walk home, I felt dazed, as though my feet were no longer touching the ground. It was like a veil had been lifted. I realized that Kenichi's presence here wasn't for family matters or even the funeral. He was here for the relocation compensation. A week later, an official notice from the redevelopment office arrived in the village, confirming the relocation plans. Kenichi's excitement was almost palpable as he met with his family to discuss the compensation details, his demeanor far from the somber tones expected so soon after a funeral. Sitting down with them, I calmly mentioned, "Based on the size of the property, you could probably get enough for 3 houses." My words seemed to strike a nerve. Kenichi's face faltered for a split second before he asked, "But mother, why would you need 3 houses? You'll be on your own, won't you?" I looked at him steadily, saying, "Even if I have money now, it can run out fast. A house will give me security. I'll live in one and rent out the other 2 to support myself." He awkwardly shrugged, his smile stiff. "I recently got involved in a project and need funds for an investment. It would be a great help if you could lend me the relocation money in cash rather than taking the house option." Although I had prepared myself for something like this, hearing him ask so bluntly still hurt deeply. I looked at him for a long moment, my voice tinged with sadness as I finally let the words I had kept hidden in my heart come to light. "Kenichi, your father and I endured hardships, sacrifices, and sleepless nights to ensure you had a bright future. We thought that when you succeeded, we could lean on you and find comfort in your presence. But your father never got that from you, and when he passed, your wife and daughter didn't even attend the funeral. Since then, you've relied on others for support, rarely thinking of me or your responsibilities as a son. And now you come to me, asking for money, with no shame? Doesn't this burden you, even a little? Kenichi looked stunned, his eyes widening in disbelief. I had never spoken to him with such harshness before, and it seemed he hadn't anticipated it. Yumi, frowning and visibly angry, left the room with our granddaughter without a word. But I didn't care. A weight was lifting off my chest, and for the first time, I felt a quiet relief at finally speaking the truths that had festered in my heart for so long. My heart had once been warm with the pride and love of a mother, but that warmth had long since faded, drained by the years of Kenichi's cold, distant attitude. For a while, I had comforted myself with the thought that maybe it was foreign influences, a different way of life that had changed him. But now, seeing him stand before me with only his self-interest, I realized he had been selfish all along. When it suited him, he talked about human rights, freedom, and independence to distance himself from his family. But now that he needed money and support, he invoked the values of traditional family bonds, expecting me to adhere to obligations he had discarded. In the end, it wasn't his years abroad that changed him. The problem was his character, a trait I had overlooked, blinded by his academic achievements and success. At that moment, I saw my deepest regret clearly. I had raised him to excel and to be independent, but I had neglected to instill in him the values of empathy, gratitude, and responsibility. I had thought that success alone would make him a good person. How wrong I had been. And now, standing in the echo of my own mistakes, I could only wonder how different our lives might have been if I had taught him that real success meant standing by the people who loved you, no matter what. I made careful, deliberate choices about my future. I drafted a will and approached the village council to finalize plans that reflected my desires and peace of mind. I decided that 2 of the 3 houses I owned would remain with my in-laws, a token of my appreciation for their enduring kindness. The 3rd house, however, would go to the Hope Project, an organization I admired, so that it might bring light to others even after I was gone. I wanted my legacy to mean something beyond material value, to reflect the gratitude I felt for those who had truly been there for me. When I shared these plans with Kenichi, he responded with an unexpected display of charm and kind words, hoping to sway me. He appealed to my emotions, reminding me of our bond and the family ties we shared. But I stayed firm, unwilling to bend. It was as though he sensed the futility of his efforts, and after an increasingly frustrated exchange, he lost his temper, storming out of the room and slamming the door. The noise echoed through the house, and a deep, painful realization settled in my heart. He had essentially abandoned me, casting me aside like an item no longer needed, a painful image of a mother now reduced to a mere nuisance. His actions showed me that he couldn't bear to support me when I needed him the most, his mother, who had poured her life into him. But in that bleak moment, my 2 nephews emerged as a beacon of hope. Seeing my distress, they reassured me with heartfelt words. "Don't worry, Auntie," they said. "Whether or not you leave us property, we'll care for you. It's the least we can do for everything you've done." Their sincerity moved me deeply. They didn't need material incentives to care for me. They simply valued family. Their kindness was profound and healing, a rare warmth that reminded me of the power of true familial love. I felt safe knowing they would be there, yet I didn't want to intrude on their lives. Rather than living with them, I decided to find a nursing home nearby, a small, modest place where I could live with independence and dignity, while still being close enough to family for support. I wanted to honor our bonds without taking advantage of them, giving each of us the space to live comfortably. In this new chapter, I found unexpected solace. My life was simple and peaceful, and I cherished the clarity I had gained. With my modest pension, insurance, and the occasional company of family, I had everything I needed. The nursing home, though modest, was a safe place where I could live freely without depending on Kenichi. This life, independent and self-sufficient, felt like a quiet victory over my doubts. I knew with certainty that relying on Kenichi would have left me vulnerable and dependent on someone who had no genuine interest in my well-being. Here, I was free from that fear, and I found comfort in the choice I had made to provide for myself, unburdened by unreliable promises. Looking back, I realized that my experience held an important lesson, a truth about the complexities of parenthood. Sometimes, as parents, we believe that our love should know no bounds and that giving without condition is the ultimate way to support our children. But I learned the hard way that too much indulgence, too much unquestioning love, can foster a sense of entitlement rather than gratitude. When children grow up expecting everything from their parents, they can lose sight of respect, viewing parental support as an entitlement rather than a gift. Over time, this entitlement can erode the parent-child bond, and what once brought joy and unity to a family becomes a source of pain and division. Perhaps my story was a cautionary tale, a journey I was destined to experience. The painful reality of aging is that the greatest fear isn't merely financial hardship or physical decline. It's the loneliness that comes when familial ties weaken. I now see that, despite my hopes for Kenichi, my true peace and happiness had to come from within. I made it my mission to live the remainder of my days in a way that brought fulfillment and independence, free from expectations that were unlikely to be met. But how does one truly prepare for old age in a world where children may not always be there to provide support? My experience taught me that there are several key areas that anyone must address to age with dignity and peace: financial security, health management, and social connections. 1. Financial security. Planning your assets wisely. Financial stability is the foundation of independence in old age. Start by assessing your anticipated retirement expenses, everything from day-to-day costs to larger, less frequent expenses like home maintenance or healthcare. From there, build a plan that includes income from pensions, savings, and potentially even rental properties. I found peace in diversifying my assets and exploring options like savings deposits, stocks, bonds, and real estate, which offered me stability and reduced my financial anxiety. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that when you're financially secure, you have the freedom to make decisions based on your values rather than the influence of others. Insurance is another critical part of this equation. Health insurance, life insurance, and long-term care insurance should be reviewed periodically to ensure they align with your needs. After all, we cannot predict our future health, but we can plan for the unexpected. I came to appreciate the peace of mind that these protections offered. Knowing I was covered allowed me to focus on living rather than worrying about potential costs. 2. Creating a safe and comfortable living environment. Having a secure and accommodating living space is essential to aging with dignity. If you own a home, consider modifications that will make it safer and more comfortable as you grow older. Features like handrails, slip-resistant flooring, and well-lit pathways can transform a home into a sanctuary. For those who rent, long-term contracts in properties that cater to senior needs are worth exploring.